And this is a sort of typical Celtic knot with the bands interlacing over and under and so on. I myself don't carve a lot of Celtic knots. I've only done it a few times, and to be honest, I don't think it really works so well in wood. Works very well as a pen drawing in something like the Book of Kells or these manuscripts. Works large in stone. There are lots of Celtic crosses where you have these Celtic details. In jewellery where you can plait wires. But wood, you've got this problem of the grain, which you don't have in these other mediums. So it's a little tricky to do in any complicated way in wood, but there is a way of going about it that will give you these nice sharp lines and tell you exactly what's going on. If you look online, you'll find all sorts of other ways of carving, and by all means experiment with them. But the way I'm approaching it as a carver is more or less as I'm approaching other carving, working from the backwards, the background outwards in a way, and setting in. And I think the result is quite sharp, and that's really what you want. This is the design I'm going to use. You can see that it consists of a series of bands that go over and under. In fact, if I do this, you can see that a bit more clearly. So these bands go under and over like this. But what you're really seeing more than anything else are these lines here. This outline. It's a continual line that goes round and follows and comes back and so on. And that, in a way, that line really is what makes Celtic knotwork so interesting for many people. So the one thing to look at this, one thing that's important to look at it, is that if you're carving a line like this, you need to have an accurate line. So this design, I originally found a version of it on the web, and this is there's several like this all over the place. So what I did is I printed this off and had a look at it, and what you can see here is how thick this line is. Now it looks great when you put it in ink. There it is. It's a nice fat line, and that tells you what's happening. But when you carve it, you have to make a decision whereabouts on that edge you're going to carve, and you need this line to look as if it's going through. So the thicker this drawn line, the more possibility of an error in how you line the chisels or the gouges up. So my version here, which I've redrawn it completely for carving, is a thin line, and that's our line, and of course it comes through optically through each one. So that's what we've got to be careful about, those lines. Now the other thing that's going on, of course, is the spaces. So between these lines there are these areas here that we need to take back. So we have a question, first of all, how deep should that go? So it's very easy with a drawing, just colour it in, and there you have it. It's nice and standing out, and you can see what's going on. But with us, we need to think about the depth of this and around the edge here. So one of the things you need to think about is this is going to be in wood. So the grain, the actual fibres of the wood, are going in this direction here, like this. This is what's happening, which means that in some points, like here, it's very weak. Some points here, the grain is very long fibres, strong, short fibres, weak. So the deeper we make this, and the narrower this is, the more fragile this is going to be, and it's liable to cut off, to break off. So we need to think about the wood as such that we're going to be carving. So what depth do we need? Well, the answer is enough. Just enough to make the point, enough to get a shadow around here. So not too deep. I would say probably no more than 1/3 of whatever band you've got. So if your band is this wide, then it would probably talking about only this deep, this sort of thing. That's probably enough. As the band gets narrower, the depth means that let me draw it here. You can see this. So if we're going, there's a fat one. As the band itself gets narrower, then of course at some point this would be a band that would be undercut. So we don't want it too thin, that's the sort of thing you do with jewellery and lines and so on. But in carving, a flat band, is really what we want. So what we need to get is that this background runs all the way through equally and is equal to this part here, so that it looks as if this whole carving is being placed on top of it. Let me start by telling you about the tool I don't want you to use, or one I wouldn't use, and that's the V tool. I've seen it used many times online, and the idea is that it's a line and therefore we can run the V tool around it like so. But here's the problem. As I get my V tool around a corner, especially at any depth, two things are going to happen. First of all, this part of the V tool is a chisel, it's straight. So as you come round the corner, that heel there pushes into this edge here and damages it. So you'll never get a nice clean edge. It's also an angle, so the wall is scooped out at an angle rather than straight down, which we might not want. And the other thing is, as you come round the corner, one part of the V tool is going to dig into the wood, pull up the grain, and the others with it. So generally it's just a fussy, awkward tool for use for tight curves. So we won't use that tool. We'll use something else, have a different approach altogether. The first tool we're going to need are chisels, and we're going to use chisels for these straight parts here, this sort of thing. So chisels come in various widths, like so. These are lettering chisels, and we're going to be just pushing them down and creating this edge like this. Now if you don't have a lettering chisel which has a bevel on both sides, you can use a carpentry chisel like this. This is a straightforward carpentry chisel, has a bevel on one side. You can certainly use these. But I'll show you exactly how we're going to use them in a minute. Let's move on. So we've got straights that we can take, that we can set the line in. And these curves here, in the same way, we will need gouges that will match these curves. And the trick is here is to be able to repeat that cut and that cut. So we'll need a certain number of gouges to do that. The other thing we'll need is here, the background here, we'll need to take that away, and for that we'll need flat gouges. This is a flat gouge, so it's not a chisel, it's slightly curved, and we'll take the background down here. Now we'll find that's very difficult to get in because this edge here will get in the way, so we will, and I really recommend you get some bent gouges. So this is the same tool as this one, but it's bent, and it'll enable you to get in here like this. So you'll need a number of bent gouges. What you need exactly depends on your design. The other thing that will be very good will be these tools. This is a corner chisel, but in this case it's slightly curved like a gouge, and you can see that it's left and right corner chisel, and where those will come into their own is in here, is in this sort of place here, in these corners. Cleaning up the corners, especially when they're not right angles, is quite tricky. So those are tools that are very useful. And lastly, to actually get into these corners, to set them in, we probably need something like either a fishtail chisel like this, or a skew chisel, like so. We'll need to help deal with the corners, or indeed a sharp knife will do it. So those are the sort of tools we'll be needing, and I'll put a list down in the download. Here's the sample that I'm going to demonstrate the techniques on. I'm using a softish wood here called gelaton, because that will make it very easy for me to show what's going on. You could use a harder wood, in which case you might need mallets such as cherry or sycamore or maple. A softer wood, you get problems with this grain and bits falling off. So what I've done here is I've got my piece of wood glued on my drawing, and then I've taken my table saw and cut here, I think you can see the end here, cut a little recess on either side. I'm assuming that this would be something like a picture frame or a mirror frame, and you could extend this. This width here could be anything you like. this width here. Not too much, but you want something like that. And we'll have to come in here and take this edge out of the way. And in this case, I'm going to take this edge off here, this end off here. But I've stuck it on here and I've cut that back. If you didn't do that, then you'll need to use just a relief, the sort of relief method I'm going to use here to take it out. So we stick stick our paper onto the wood. We can do something like that, and then I'm going to hold it in this vise here. One of the things that's not right with this is that what I need to have is this slightly above this block of wood here. So I need to make this so that I can get my tools in and across. You don't want this above it, you won't be able to get in there. So I need to adjust those. But that'll be held nice and firmly in the vise, and then I can start carving it. I'm going to start with the outside of the design first. So here's my reference background, and here's my reference background. And if this was the end of the moulding, or the end of our design, I need to take that away. So this is a little bit of ordinary relief carving. This would be the subject. And so what I'll do is I'll use my V tool here and just run across a line here like this. That is just above the background, just above, I'm going to call that the background here. Then push this back. I'll just take a bit of this off so you can see. So I'm coming down to just above the background. I'll just go up there a little bit. So very carefully try and eye that through, and then I'd be levelling this off with a flat gouge. So this is how I'd work a background, and then I'd also go into this area here, clean all that up. And if you want that smoother, then of course you would have to scrape it, sand it, that sort of thing. And of course you can come along here and merge that in. So that would be that end sort of finished. But what I now need to do is to set this edge in here. And depending on how far away I was with the V tool, I can nibble that back again, just stopping short of that background. So I don't want to stab in, but I want to come in close. Let's see that bit here. So there's a little bit, you can see that little bit of mess down the bottom. That shows I haven't gone into the background. But I also want to do this. I want to take this into here a little bit, like this. I'll show you about these sides in a moment. But so I've taken that in like that, and I've come very close to the line. So what I need to do now is, with a chisel, set this line in. And here, and I might need a mallet, but if this was harder wood. So we take that. So what I'm trying to get is a neat junction here. And what I am doing is going straight down. So this is whatever chisel I'm using, I'm going straight down and not at an angle. And there is a reason for that, and I will explain that in a minute. So make sure that's square. And then we'll pick a gouge. Sorry, I want to do something first. What I want to do is put a little notch in here, a little stop cut in there with your skew chisel or fishtail or whatever. And that will help protect the grain. So that and that there. And this gouge we should pick so that it joins this line and heads down there. Okay, so we pick that, and then it's a matter of cleaning that up. and if necessary you go back and sort of fiddle with that. Now we've used that gouge here, and of course we can use it on the other end as well, so remember what that gouge is. So we've done the ends, and now we can just turn to the sides. We're going to do the sides very similar. So here's the wood we're removing, like say here. I'm going to take my gouge and nibble that back a little bit, very carefully, making a little turn like that, do you see? Making sure I don't go down to the bottom, up to the line, remove some of that waste. And I'd use the same tool all the way along. So when I've got the tool in the hand, I would just repeat that. I would also still, now it's even more important to put our little stop cut in there to make sure nothing breaks out from the grain. And then it's picking a gouge that does the same thing. So here's a biggish gouge, that might work. This gouge, there you go, this one will do it. So I'm going to stab straight down, and I'm going to pull that round, and it'll match that over there. So even though it's not long enough, because that's quite a big gouge you'd need, I'm coming round on the line. And that gouge, that movement of the gouge, following its cut, that'll give you an accurate line. And then here, of course, I need to go back to that other one, which is a little bit tighter. Take that down. So I've now set in the edge. This is very much like relief carving, and in fact it's the same thing we do when we're doing relief lettering. So although this is a Celtic knot, this could be a letter D or something like that. So just to say that there's nothing special about what I'm doing here in terms of carving. And I'll clean all this up, merge all that in. So I would work all the way around, the design at this point with that stage, repeating with the same tools each time. We have two sorts of internal surfaces. One, like here, is completely square. The other has a rounded side, in this case two rounded sides. So I'm going to deal with these square ones first, and then we'll look at the rounded ones. But before I do, let's just go back to this drawing and just be clear about what's happening. So what you can see is that this band, this line, is going across this line here, so this band here. So this line is continuous between this background and this background, and on the other side, and so on. And we need to be clear right now which is over and which is under. And this is a simple design, but it might be that your design is much more complicated. So it's a good idea to just mark those before you start cutting. It is very easy to cut the wrong band, and then you can't really repair it because you're right on the surface. So I suggest you do that. You just make a few marks here, make sure that you know what's happening and that you can follow this line across. Because what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to stab in that line here, like that, with a chisel, right across. And we're going to do it here as well. So I'm going to go across all the long lines, stopping short at the bar here, like this. So I would go same tool, same width, just set that in like that. So it's just a stab cut on the surface. And then, so that's doing that side of the square. So I would need to find, like for example, another chisel that will do this side here. Now it's going over that band here, and then starts a curve. So I want to stop short of the curve, and the same on this side. Might as well do that here, although I'm not going to do that one straight away. So come over here, so I'm across the band, and I'd probably again go all the way down, but stopping short. So each side of this square now has been stabbed around the edge, and the lines are going across. So my job now will be to remove those those areas. So let me just make sure I've got this one done as well. Yeah, so if I just do those two now, so I've stabbed in the outline. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just do this in the corners. It's really useful to put these stab cuts in there. It's a little bit of extra work, but they're just pushed in with your knife or your screw chisel like that. And what that's doing is protecting any breakout from the grain. So now I'm going to go back to my chisel. That now is more of the size for the background, for this actual square. I'm going to set that in a little bit more using the same stab cut, and then I'm going to angle this across like this and take out a chunk in the middle like this, and then I'm going to do that again, coming square down, straight down like that. Take a little bit more down, like so. And the depth I'm going to is, of course, more or less this depth here, because I want this to look as if it's going underneath. So once I've got that down there, and I might make a third stab cut, and I'll just repeat that. I would be doing this all the way along at the same time, trying to make the same cuts. I can now turn to my bent gouge, start cleaning this out. And what I've got, what I should end up with, is a background that's, and I'll have to go with the grain here, so I'm going this direction, depends which way the grain is going, working that down and flat till it's by eye just the same as that, and then I do a final clean up with my chisel here. So what I've got now is a really sharp line, sharp edge, and that edge here we know is going to go across here because I've stabbed that in. So just make sure that's cleaned up. And I would make sure that before leaving this is nice and clean. So everything's clean as you go along. So just make sure we're right into the corner there. So I'm going to get in the way of the camera here. I really need to come in this direction. I've got to pay attention to the grain. Okay, then when you've got one, you can do all the squares, so all those are done. And when we've done those, we can turn to the angled ones. So from the square, I'm going to move to these recesses that have the curve. Essentially it's the same in that I need to stab the line in as if it's going through. So I'm stabbing the edge line in across like this, stabbing it across here, for example, across here and right out. So I stab the edges in, so all those lines are now continuous. Then I'll pick a gouge instead of a chisel, and this gouge will give me this curve here. Again, the curve looks as if it's heading across there, down there. That's what we're after. So I'll stab that line in there. I can do one here, so I'll use the same tool. Now it might be that you need a narrower tool, like that one will do there. Stab that in. And if you don't have a narrower tool, you can use an even narrower tool and sort of shunt it along. As long as you make the same movement each time, it's going to be equal. So from there, I mustn't forget my stab cuts. Exactly the same. And then I would go over and I would make that a little bit deeper and take a notch out of there. That's not going to come out if it's attached to the corner, but that'll come out in a minute. So this one, I'm going to just go for the narrow gouge here, but I would take that out. The paper's coming up, but just ignore that. And then I need a narrower chisel, this one. Let me just take that paper off so you can get out of the way. There's my narrower chisel. I'm pretty much down now to the depth that I want to go. Looks a bit of a mess, but I'm happy with that. So again, we will go for our bent gouge. Again, it has to be narrower this way to get in there. So that's exactly as before. But this is where these bent tools will come into their own, because this one's a bit of a right angle, but down here and in this corner here, you need something to get in there that's a little bit tighter than a bit more acute than your square gouge. So we can use those if we need to get into there. Oh, where is it? That's the one. So as I come down here, what I have to do is make sure that this background now here is the same depth as that in the square and that in the background. Just by eye, if it looks right, it's right enough. You don't have to measure anything. And then be a final stab in. Just make sure those junctions are clean. So there's often a little bit of backwards and forwards to get this just right. But I'll be working all these as I go along and cleaning up so that when I leave this one in the end, I say basically I'm not coming back. So try and get those sorted as we go along. Turning now to the over and unders of the bands, we have stab cuts we've already put in from when we took out the background, and we're going to keep this, or I'm going to keep this flat. I'm not going to round this over, although I'll show you a little bit about that. The important thing is that because we've gone square here, it means that if we drop the band down, we keep the same width. If we'd gone at an angle, then as we drop the band down, the band would have got wider. That's why we kept the walls vertical. So we've got a stab cut, and we have two approaches. One is which we can just take a little knock out of there like that, and that decides the depth that we're going to. And then from back here, rather than, we just slowly bring that down like that. Yeah. So on this side, I would make I've got my stab cut here. Then I'd make and why I do that is because I can make sure I do that the same depth. And then starting back here, come down. And if the grain's a bit funny, a bit odd, then you might have to slice the cut one way or the other, like this. And that's essentially it. Start way back here, make it soft. You don't have to do an S shape, just quietly sort of head down as if you're going underneath there like that. So I would do all the ones in the same direction, like these first. Make sure I've got my depth. Then go back here. Oops. And then like this here. Oops, there it is. And if necessary, I'll turn it around. So nice long strips. And we'll be left with a little bit here where it goes over the top. So if I do one here, you can see how it's starting to look. Even on the round bit here where it's going around the corner, you'll find you should be able to just take that down. So you can see just now going under and over. The paper is quite good to leave that for the moment, although of course you might have drawn this on, because that shows you the high spots and what's left on the original surface. But eventually we'll take the paper off. Here's the knot finished, looking like a knot. A couple of things. Probably the depth I'm going down to here is about 1/3 of the distance. So not very much, it doesn't take much, but because we've got a nice hard edge here, we get a good shadow. Also you can see that these should be fairly equal. In other words, I'm taking off the same amount of wood each time. And we're just looking as if it's just quietly going up and over. That's what we want. And nicely standing out from the background. You'll find when you drop this down that because you're into the edge now, you might find and discover little bits, like I've just seen another one here. If I can just pull it out for you. There's a little bit of wood there. So sometimes it reveals more once you've gone down a bit. So check everything, check these lines that everything's going through, and then we're left with removing the paper. And the easiest way to do that, and you could have done it before of course, is literally to just skim this thing off like that. Mostly the paper just will peel off because it's a photo mount type adhesive, so a lot of it will just you do need nails, but a lot of it will peel off anyway. Oh, here's some over here, that'll peel off, but otherwise I would just take my gouge and just quietly skim that very lightly under the paper to fresh wood around like that. So it doesn't take much to get all the paper off. And you might like to put a very, very fine sandpaper over the whole thing, just to clean up the surface afterwards. Here's the finished Celtic knot. I think it looks great with these sharp edges, and you can see the under and over, and I think that's very clear, and I like it, and that's how I would finish it. Some people do put a hollow down the middle, like a little channel, and other people round it over. In both cases you have to pay a lot of attention to the way the grain is going, and so much more complicates the look, and the actual technique, the actual act of getting this wood out. So for me, this is the best way to leave it as a band. I think that works very well.